Hey, listeners, welcome back to Podcast and Amplify. I'm your host, Kristen. So today's guest is Annie Gichuru. She's a leading racial equity coach and consultant for online entrepreneurs. And she's going to talk to us all about how to become a genuine ally and advocate for people of color. And if you are part of this community, listen to this podcast, you know that our mission in this show is really to elevate underrepresented voices and to be an ally. I think for a lot of online business owners, there can be questions around how do I do that? And how do I do it in a way that is authentic? And I'm not going to say feels good because I think it can be uncomfortable. That's okay. But Annie's going to help us dive into this topic. I'm really excited to have her here. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you for having me, Kristen. I'm so happy to be here.
So I love to start conversations with my guests around a pivotal moment in your life that brought you to this point, this version of you and where you're at today.
For me, it would be motherhood. Motherhood is what completely changed my life in terms of my priorities. We used to work in corporate. My background is actually in human resources. And so worked in corporate Australia for over 15 years in HR. And after becoming a mom for the first time, my priorities just felt different. It was no longer the desire to climb the corporate ladder. It was no longer the desire to kind of get into executive level and maybe even C-suite if I wanted to. It was now thinking about how can I live a life that will be more fulfilling, meaningful? How can I be a great role model for my daughter at the time? And how can I live a legacy that I will be proud of? And then becoming a mother for the second time, I've got two children, a boy and a girl. And I just felt very drawn to doing work that that will have more meaning. And it led me into coaching, which then got me working with a lot of migrant women of color, because that is how I identify as, having called Australia home for actually not almost, over 20 years. And seeing the mindset issues that we deal with and wanting to support them to unshackle that, particularly in their corporate careers. And that then pivoting very much so around 2020, when there was the resurgence and the awareness around racial inequity following the public execution of George Floyd. And I saw a gap. I saw a gap in the coaching industry where there wasn't enough representation of people of color, but more so the lack of knowledge that there was around race and matters to do with being equitable in business. And having my background in HR and having dealt a lot from a diversity and inclusion perspective, I was able to bring that expertise, but more from dealing with online business owners, coaches in particular, and teaching them how can they do better? Where are the areas where they are not aware of? Because a lot of people that I come across always think that they are so inclusive. They're like, oh, but I'm an inclusive person. I'm a good person. I volunteer. I support different charities and non-for-profits. I'm a good person. And the issue has never been whether you're a good person or not. There's something called implicit biases. We are unconscious of the things that we do, and it's because of how we've been brought up and the belief systems that we have. And so there are certain people, there are certain things that we unconsciously treat in a different way. And it's getting to the bottom of that, which influences how we behave and how we do business and the people we end up attracting and serving. And so making people more aware of their implicit biases, which leads to prejudices and racism, how can they do better? And so that is a long story cut really short.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are well-meaning, and you hear, I don't see color. You heard that for a long time. And the attention behind that was good, right? That people really were trying to say, I don't think they were trying to say, I don't see you, which is really what was happening. I think they were perhaps trying to say, I'm not judging you by your
Mhm.
color, or that's not the first thing I see, or I see you as a person. But even well intentioned, meaning approaches or sayings, you have to re-examine them and think about, okay, what am I actually saying and what harm is it causing? So I hear what you're saying about it's not a good or bad, it's just being aware and open to learning and being educated, right?
Mm.
Around how can I see things differently? How can I say things differently? How can I
Mhm.
view the world differently? How can I view myself differently? And just questioning, I think, is so important. So the work that you do is so important and so needed. I want you to help us define what is an ally and why are they so important for people of color and for showing up.
An ally, put quite simply, is somebody who is in a position of privilege, a position of power, and they are able to advocate for others who have a marginalized identity. And the key thing is, even though it costs them their power, even though it costs them their privilege. That is what an ally is. It is standing in solidarity, really, with those who have marginalized identity, especially when you realize that you have some form of power, some form of privilege and influence, which I think we all have to different degrees. But in particular, when it comes to matters of race, we know that the white race and white supremacy, hierarchically ranked, is at the top. And so when you have that privilege and power that's been given to you, whether you want it or not, it's being in that position. How can I use this to better the lives of those who do not have that privilege and that particular kind of influence and power? And I think the importance of allyship is because this is work that Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color cannot do on their own. This is work that requires all of us to lock arms together and to bring down the, the really inequitable systems that we have, systems that were not built by people of color, systems that have been in place since time immemorial. And so it requires all of us to play a role. And the more of us that can do that, the more we can begin to impact more lives, the more we can begin to educate our children, and not just ourselves, but the future generations, to know that, you know what, this is inequitable, this is not just, this is not right. And that is where allyship comes in. And in many times, in many ways, it begins to equalize the system. It begins to level the playing field when we have advocates, when we have allies who are speaking up against systems that are exclusionary, systems that are oppressing. And allies play a significant role when it comes to the fight of racial justice.
And so, how can non people of color, how can they start to educate themselves and understand those barriers, those systems that are in place, and what their role can be? Sometimes I find it frustrating when I have with white friends who are just like, don't really seem to see it as their responsibility. So I guess that's two-part question. How can they educate themselves? And then how do you, I don't know if it's our responsibility to help them engage, but what do you do when you're just like, you see just a total lack of awareness or even understanding that there needs to be an education happening?
I think firstly is the awareness piece. A lot of people just are not aware that they're, excluding. They're not aware that they have the way of thinking that they have. And I think it's just the awareness and unpacking, understanding when it comes to matters of race. How much do I know, or how much am I assuming that I know? Because a lot of times, going back to what we were talking about, telling somebody, I do not see color, and it's coming from a place of wanting to put the other person at ease and making them feel like you're no different from me. The intention may be good as the person who is saying this to the other person, but you're not taking into consideration how might that other person feel. So when it comes to educating yourself on matters to do with race, it's trying to understand more about the other group, more about the other people. What is it? How has their experience been? Yes, I know I classify myself as a good person. I'm doing the right thing, but I'm curious. You've got to have a level of curiosity that wants you to know, why is it so inequitable out there? Or maybe I'm a little bit ignorant, but I'm seeing a lot of things. There's a lot of news stories that are breaking about police brutality, particularly there in the United States. There's something that's not right. Begin to get curious and find out, what is it like for people of color, and in particular, Black people? What is their history? What is their story? And once you get curious enough to try and get to the bottom and find out, that's how you begin to educate yourself. It starts from a place of curiosity. It starts from a place of, well, I think I know what I know, but what is their story? What is their lived experience? What's their history? And once you begin to get curious and educating yourself, really, I often say, needs to come from a place of, how do you consume content? If you're somebody who loves to listen to podcasts, then this is a good place to begin, because then you can mix it up with the other kind of different genres that you listen to, business, spirituality, whatever it is. Throw in a little bit of DEI in there so that you can begin to educate yourself. If you're somebody who loves to read books, start by reading a book. And the recommendations are, there's a plethora of books out there that you can begin with. If it's documentaries, find the kind of content that you like to consume, that's easy for you to consume, and start there. For me, podcasts are a big thing. I listen to podcasts every day. And so that's one of the ways that even I myself as an educator keep myself up to par and in this work through the listening. And so that's where it would begin, Kristen, but it has to come from a place of curiosity, because if you're just going about life and thinking that this doesn't affect you, it doesn't impact you, it's living in a bubble, because that's not how the world truly is. There are people who are really oppressed. There are people who are really excluded. And we all can play a role in first educating ourselves and seeing, what role can I play within my small unit? It may be just within my family, within my business, but what role can I play so that I can begin to dismantle the systems that are there that have been working against different groups